Whoa, we're on this side now. No. What's going on, guys? It's Barry here with the Scryguys, and today we're going to be talking about the commanders from the Lord of the Rings Holiday Edition. Let's check these guys out. We got, bam, Aragorn, Hornburg hero, 1 in Naya, legendary creature, human soldier. Attacking creatures you control have first strike and renown 1, which I believe was a mechanic introduced in Origins. I want to say, I can't really remember that far back now. That was like 8 years ago. But this creature has, whenever a renowned creature you control deals combat damage to a player, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. That's pretty sick. I mean, it's a pretty Naya deck. But I also think there's just much more better +1/+1 counter commanders out there in these colors. Let's check these out. I mean, you could also put these in that deck to maybe have a secret commander in there, but we have ones like Shalai and Halar, which it has flying, vigilance, same casting cost. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, Shalai and Halar deals that much damage to a target opponent, which is pretty cool. It acts like the enchantment all will be one from Phyrexia, the most recent one. Yeah. But it also has to deal with like +1/+1 counters. We have Helena and Elena partners, which this almost acts like a Xenagos, a mini Xenagos, but it also puts +1/+1 counters on it. So you could build this deck with like a whole bunch of mana dorks and then make them to 3/3s, which is really cool, and then just give things haste. I think you could slot that in here as well. Oh, one thing I do have to remind people is that, like, Renown is the mechanic that when a renowned creature deals combat damage, it gets +1/+1 to kind of like announce that it's been renowned. You can't put a +1/+1 counter on it and it's renowned. It just doesn't work that way. We also, I think probably if you're building this deck, Champion of Lambholt will probably be your all-star in that deck, just because if you're going to be playing a lot of creatures in there, you want Champion of Lambholt to get bigger and bigger. That way all these creatures that are hitting for first strike will go ahead, will get the double counters, just as long as what's it called, the power of Champion of Lambholt is high enough to where nothing can block it. And then we have Hamza, Guardian of Arashin, 4 in Selesnya. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each counter you have on a creature. Creature spells cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control, +1/+1 counters. So if you're going to be putting +1/+1 counters on all your creatures, Hamza is going to act like a Selesnya version of Animar, where it's just going to give you a discount for all of your bigger creatures, and hopefully you can go ahead and finish out the game. You know, you're in these colors of Naya, so you can go for the Moonshaker and the Crater Hoofs, Finale of Devastation type of lines, and really kind of, kill the table. But as far as like a power level would go, I don't know how high it can get, just because it seems like a very board dependent commander where you need all your creatures, and there's just board wipes aplenty nowadays. You know, I think when I first started playing Commander, there was like your usual like Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, Blasphemous Act, Hollowed Burial. It wasn't like a huge amount. Now there's like a bunch. So that's where I think the fault or the cons of this deck kind of lies in, is where if you don't have a board, you might not be doing anything, or a board wipe, 1 or 2 board wipes might just set you so far back into the game that you won't be able to get back into it. But it's Naya, so that's kind of what it's always been doing, like with commanders like Gahiji, Samut, which is also another really fun like Naya commander. It's just, it's really board dependent. So if you don't enjoy playing board dependent decks, this might not be the one for you. Next one we have Galadriel, Light of Valinor, 2 and Bant, legendary creature, Elf Noble, Alliance. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. 1, add 3 green. Wow, okay. to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So already a little bit better than Aragon. And then the last one, scry 2 and then draw a card. It kind of reminds me of just the most recent card that got printed out from Wilds of Eldraine, which is like the Hilda, the Azorius creature. That one you could, it doesn't have a limitation on how many times you could do those things though. This one it does, but it's kind of doing everything Bant wants to do. It's like, it's kind of ramping you. It's building up a huge board presence for all your little tiny creatures, and then you get to draw a card. And the thing about this is, I am not 100% sure. Please, someone who's a judge, check me on this. But if you flicker Galadriel, could you do those things again? Because now Galadriel is a new entity. I'm not 100% sure, but that would be kind of one of the ways to get around that stipulation. But you guys let me know. But man, I always feel like Bant is one of those like color pies that are just really easy to build and build in any kind of way, like cheap or expensive. Even if you build it in a budget way, I feel like it's still relatively strong to kind of push you into like 7 to 8 power level, even if you have a slower start. Especially if you politic your way out of like, you know, hey, I'm not doing anything, I'm just playing mana dorks. Which I used to do a lot. But I mean, this is probably how I would build it, and it's sort of pretty on the cheap side, right? We have a couple creatures like Dreamstalker and Shrieking Drake that are really cheap to bounce, and then Ornithopter and Memnite type of creatures where they cost 0 and you can go ahead and blink them in and out, and then hopefully go through those triggers to maximize all three. And then you also have cards like that are dependent on creatures entering the battlefield, like Silverback Elder, which you go ahead and blink a Dreamstalker into Omnithopter, and you at least get to do two to three things out of this, right? Or we also have Karametra, God of Harvest. Whenever you cast a creature, you get a forest or plains out of your field, and not even just a basic one. You can get tri-lands, tap lands, you know, just anything that has this type on the lands, in which we have abundance now. You know, there's those artifact lands with the land types. There's a bunch of those that just come in tap, which is really cool, especially for budget players when they're trying to get into it, wanting to upgrade their decks a little bit more. Maybe they bought a fetch land, they want to fetch for one of the tap lands at the start of the game, which is really cool because, you know, dual lands are like $500 to $600. So I think this is a really easy build for a lot of people, especially if you like playing creature type decks. I know some people are gonna be like, well, if you're just gonna do that, just play Chulane or Cullen or Culane, whatever, however you want to say. I heard it was like Culane because of Cuchulainn from Irish folklore, but I'm not 100% sure, right? Everyone says Chulane. But I mean, I think this one's a little bit more interesting though, because you do get the ability to pump up your board with the +1/+1 counters, and then you get to scry, kind of like filter out your draws and all that stuff, and you get to ramp just a little bit. So I think it's a little bit more of an interesting build, a little bit more fun, a little less, oh, like everybody wants to kill your, you know, Culane or whatever, Chulane, as soon as possible. This one might give you a little bit more time on the board with it. And yeah, there's just, you know, and then this is also in the lines of Craterhoof, Moonshaker lines, which yeah, that's pretty, right? Tooth and nail for both of them, and then you're kind of just winning, especially with, but like I think I like these because of what the Silverback Elder and the Karametra, it gives you more value and all that stuff like that. Let's check out the third one, Gandalf of the Secret Fire, 1 in Jeskai. Legendary Avatar Wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand during an opponent's turn, exile that card with 3 time counters on it instead of putting it into the graveyard as it resolves. Then if the exile card doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. So this one is a little bit more niche. It's very spellcaster Jeskai-ish, and honestly, if it was me, I'd much rather just play Narset, because then you have to wait 3 turns to be able to take advantage of, again, of those spells that you casted on other people's turns. So, and it also requires a lot of setup, right? It's a 3/4 wizard. It doesn't have any sort of protection, which kind of sucks. And then you have to make sure you have cards like Vidalcan Ori and Leyline Anticipation, so you can play your sorcery spells at instant speed. I mean, like, because at the time right now where I was thinking about it, when I was trying to build it in my head, it's like you're just playing a whole bunch of like brainstorms, ops, a lot of cantrips, very those kind of draws. And then like, even if you try to think about your removal spells like your Swords of Plowshares and all that stuff, then it becomes conditional, right? Because you're like, well, if there's nothing to Swords of Plowshare, then you just, you know, just put it in the graveyard. As far as counter spells go, I would probably go with like modal counter spells if you're gonna use them in here, just because you can go ahead and Mystic Confluence, and then when you take out the Suspend, you can at least draw some cards. There's a couple of counter spells out there that have like counter target spell, or look at the top 4 cards. You know, I'm kind of glad that's happening now, because then it gives these counter spells a little bit more reasons to be in decks, right? Because before it used to be like cancel, 3 mana counter spell, but now you have a lot of modal cards, so that's what I would put in here. Especially one thing that you want to do also is just find ways to take off the suspend counters faster. Sphinx of the Second Sun is like kind of Christmas Dreamland in Jeskai, because it's 8 mana, unless you're playing like high powered like EDH, when you have all the mana rocks to get there fast. Paradox Haze is the one that's more achievable. That one will give you a second upkeep. So then the way like Suspend works is that like the beginning of upkeep, you take a time counter off, and then Paradox Haze, you get another upkeep, you take another one off. Then you only have to really wait for 2 turns. But then if you have Sphinx of the Second Sun, then you get to do it, right? But it just seems like a lot of work. It seems like a lot of work for not a whole lot of payoff. It's a lot of setup, and it's just kind of rough, man. Especially if there's a Dranith Magistrate out, then like all these suspend counters don't really matter. Then those spells just, I think, fizzle or just stay in exile. It just kind of sucks because Gandalf is just such a prolific character, and I kind of like don't like any of the iterations of him from the Universes Beyond, except for maybe the Panharmonicon one, which, I mean, everyone loves a Panharmonicon effect. So actually, no, that's a lie, because the other one that does like buffs your creatures whenever you cast a non-creature spell is okay too. I thought he'd be way more OP though, you know what I mean? But yeah, this is definitely how I would build it, like with things that give me second upkeeps and then give me flash speed. There's a couple spells that also give your spells flash speed as well. It's just, yeah, it does require a lot of setup, and then by the time you're really utilizing it, you could have done a whole lot of other things that would have mattered even more. But that's just how I feel. Jeskai is it's a weird build, because you're either going Spell Slinger or whatever, you know, like there's so many things like Kaikar, Narset that are just kind of better and will improve or like will forward your game plan much farther than this one will. So it's kind of a rough build, you know. And then the last one I think we're doing, Witch King Sky Scourge, 5 and Rakdos, legendary Wraith Noble flying. When you attack with one or more Wraiths, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is their total power. You may play those cards this turn, Undying, and it's a 5/5. This one is kind of also rough to to build around, just because if it had said exile cards from the top of your library, X total power, you may play those cards until your next turn. Because then if you're like slapping this down turn 7, then you swing in with some of your Wraiths, you might not have any more mana left to cast those things. So then it kind of almost feels like a Nombo on the turn it comes down. You would also, so like, I mean, but one thing I would have to do is we do have a good amount of Wraiths even before the Lord of the Rings set came out, but you could at least have 9 Nazguls in your deck, Witch King of Angmar. And then the one thing I wanted to focus on too is being able to take advantage of the Undying, just because 7 mana is a lot. Because if it gets killed, like your 7 mana creature will get exiled by will get exiled by a 1-mana Path to Exile, which always just does not feel good, right? So it'd be nice to have a couple outlets for sacking, but also a couple ways to remove the +1/+1 counters on it, so then it could continue having Undying. So this is the way I would kind of look at it, is like, you know, with cards like Cauldron of Souls, Hex Parasite, there's a couple other creatures out there that remove counters. I think there's a land that removes counters from things, so that's pretty sick. But yeah, it's just pretty tough, I would say, just because it does cost 7 mana, and then you exile all those cards. By the time it comes down, you don't even want to swing, just because you're like, you don't want to exile all those cards away. And at this point, maybe your Nazguls are pretty beefy. They might be like 5/5s or whatever like that. So it's kind of rough. I would say it's kind of rough. Maybe if they would just had worded it where you get to play those cards until your next turn, or you have to set it up where like you play last chance to have one more turn to kind of dig through your deck and all that stuff. So it's kind of, this one is kind of underwhelming. I think the winner for this one, really, it has to be Galadriel.
We have a winner.
Light of Valinor. It's just a pretty wide array of ways you could build this deck. You can, and different kind of power levels where it can kind of slot into any kind of power level. I feel like Aragorn is more mid-power, like 5 to 7 kind of decks where you're like, everyone's swinging, no one's really trying to combo to win, no one's going fish consultation or anything like that. The Jeskai one, it does require a lot of setup. I could see people building that at a pretty high level, but again, a lot of setup. And then the Witch King is it's just a really rough spot. I feel like, I think maybe it might be better than 99 because you can reanimate it and then swing out with it to exile 5 cards and then have those cards to play with for the turn. But again, situational. Galadriel, Light of Valinor, I think is probably the strongest one out of the whole thing. And a lot of people are gonna be like, well, it does feel while it does feel generic, I just feel like you can slot it into any budget and it'll be a fun deck to play. But yeah, that's all it is, guys. As you can tell, it has gotten darker because I started this when there was sunlight out there. But yeah, let me know which one of the Lord of the Rings holiday cards is your favorite, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know what else kind of content you guys want to see from us. And have a good one.